Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week we have the privilege and the honor of starting the Torah from Bereshit. And the very second story in the entire Torah is the story of murder. One brother, Cain, murders his brother Hevel, Abel. Cain murders Abel. And at that point, the murder of Abel represented the murder of 25% of the entire world's population. Because after all, there was only 4 human beings alive: Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. Earlier this week I told you about the local story in Palm Beach County of a principal who was reinstated to his job even though he denied the Holocaust. And how outrageous it is that somebody could be hired as a principal in Palm Beach County where there are so many survivors who are still alive to tell the story. But there is good news this week, and that is that Mark Zuckerberg, Jewish boy who is the owner and founder of Facebook, instated a rule on Facebook that no longer will Holocaust denial be allowed to be posted on Facebook. Now imagine, 2.5 billion people use Facebook, and social media is such a platform for Holocaust denial. And not only won't it be allowed for there to be Holocaust denial, but when somebody does try to search Holocaust denial, they will be rerouted to education and information about the Holocaust. And this is a tremendous step forward in the right direction, because hopefully as the leader of social media, Facebook will set the bar and the example for others on social media that finally Holocaust denial will be unlawful and unaccepted on any social media platform. But going back to this week's Torah portion, we know that Adam and Eve were the handiwork of God. And although they sinned by eating from the tree of life, they remained the role models for all of humanity. And the question is, what was so great about Adam and Eve? And Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel says, imagine the horror of parents waking up to the reality that one of their children was murdered. But even worse than that, their other child is the murderer. Normally people would be so paralyzed with despair, with depression, with hopelessness, that they would give up on life. What future can you possibly have when one of your children tragically was murdered and your second child was the murderer? The greatness of Adam and Eve was that they went ahead and had a third child and continued to populate the world. And we as a human race are here today because they did not give in to the darkness. They did not despair in the face of the greatest evil that occurred in their very own family. And the message of Adam and Eve, as we begin the Torah again, is all anew. The very first lesson in the very first Torah portion is that no matter what challenges we may face, we can never give up. We owe it to the future to believe in it and to have faith in God and to carry on despite whatever obstacles come our way. Talking about Holocaust denial, there's one 5-minute documentary that I would recommend that every Holocaust denier needs to watch. 6 million of our brethren, 1.5 million children were murdered systematically during the Holocaust. But there is really no stories of people who went into the crematoriums, into the gas chambers, and came out alive. That was the systematic way that the Nazis murdered our Jewish brothers and sisters. But there's one documentary which is only 5 minutes long, told by 5 living survivors: Chaim Schwimmer, David Leitner, Wolf Greenwald, Judah Weiss, and Herschel Hishkovitz. And they sit down in this 5-minute documentary called Hope on Simchas Torah. And they tell the story how on September 13th, 1944, was the day of Simchat Torah, and the Nazis came into the barracks and rounded up 50 young children to be taken because they knew it was a Jewish holiday. They loved, in their evil, sadistic way, to bring more death and destruction upon the Jewish people on their holidays. And they rounded up 50 young boys and took them to the gas chambers. And they were all told to undress. And they went into the gas chambers. And they tell over in this documentary how they were crammed in with 500 other people into this gas chamber. And one of them, David Leitner, says he went right up front near the gas chamber because he said, I don't want to be the last to die. I want to be the first to die. Why should I watch everyone else die? And he says they locked the doors as they were all undressed. And they began to cry and began to pray. And he said, one of them turned to him and said, my father would tell me at the Passover Seder that God rescued the Jews at their lowest point in Egyptian slavery. It's never too late to pray. Let us ask for mercy. Maybe God will save us. And he said, I turned to my friend and I said, are you crazy? Look where you are. You're undressed. You're in the gas chambers. No one comes out alive. And he says they stood there for about a half hour as they locked all the windows and sealed all the ducts so that no air can come in as they were about to let in the gas. And they were all prepared to die. And they said their goodbyes. Suddenly the door opened up and everyone was shocked and they turned to the door. And there they saw Nazi officers, SS men coming on motorcycles, and they came in and they said, Achtung, there was a new selection being done. And they called out the 50 young boys and they said, you needed to work in a different department. You were requested, we need young men to work. Get dressed and go back to your barracks. And they said they remember going back to the barracks and suddenly feeling that they were given a second chance to live. And they remember in the barracks, one said to the other, today is Simchas Torah, let's dance. And these boys, these 50 boys in the barracks started to dance the songs of Simchas Torah, celebrating life in the midst of the greatest darkness and the greatest evil known to man. Let any Holocaust survivor talk to these living survivors and hear their story of not only being in Auschwitz in the concentration camps, but being in the actual gas chamber. And the only survivors known to not only come out of the concentration camps, but the only living survivors known to have actually come out of a gas chamber. This is the story of our people, tragically. But the story of our people is that we never gave in to despair and to evil. Yes, evil has been around from the beginning of creation. In the very first Torah portion, we have murder of one brother against the other. Sadly and tragically, mankind has still not learned the basic lesson. As God told Cain, the blood of your brother is crying out from the earth, in the plural, because not just his blood, but all future generations. Let this year be the year as we begin the Torah anew, to finally learn to follow the commandment in the Torah, to love your neighbor as yourself. But the only way we will learn that is by recognizing history. And just like the Torah records the story of the murder of Cain and Abel, we must record the stories of the Holocaust so mankind can finally learn to change its ways and love one another and live in peace and harmony. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and may we journey through the Torah with renewed vigor and inspiration, and let us rise to the call of the Torah to live, in, as it says in this week's Torah portion, as human beings fit, who were designed to be in God's image. Let us reflect God's image in our lives each and every day and each and every moment. Shabbat Shalom and a wonderful week.